One of the things that people don't always know about me is I'm a reformed high school English teacher. I didn't say retired, I said reformed. But because of that, I can't resist the temptation and the opportunity to use that highfalutin education my parents paid for to make sure that people know I really did go to college and I got words. So I want to begin just by giving you a thought about the times we're in. Some people quote Dickens and say it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. But I'm going to quote Shakespeare and say now is the time, now is the winter of our discontent. This is the idea here is, we have gotten to a point, we have really reached the depth of our unhappiness. And I actually believe that better times really and truly are ahead. And so I think it's important to have that hopeful and aspirational note as we go forward with this opportunity, because I think this year marks an opportunity that we have never had in the history of public education in this state, let alone in this country. And I'm very excited about it. All right, first of all, I'm going to make a promise to you. I'm going to give you the same promise that Elizabeth Taylor made to all her husbands. I won't hold you for long. I'm just going to take you through some ideas and some thoughts. I want to think about what was good about the year that we've had, what was not good about the year we've had, what's next. I'm going to leave you with some questions to help you facilitate the planning you're doing in writing and developing your action plan. So this is going to be a timely conversation. But first of all, I want to tell you a little bit about how I spent my year. When our office closed last year in March of 2020, we were directed to leave both a voicemail and to have a automatic response in our email stating that our offices at the California Teachers Association were closed. But if you want to get a hold of me, here's my cell phone number and this is my email address. Well, I basically gave my personal contact information to 300,000 of my closest friends, and they used it. And so in my conversations in the past 20 months with teachers about COVID, about school closure, about school reopening, I got a chance to ask teachers questions about, as we were preparing for the reopening of school, what were they feeling hopeful about? So this is an unofficial survey. This is not something I could publish because it wasn't done in any way that would meet the requirements for being a scientific poll or anything. But I did ask any of the teachers who I spoke with or who called me or who emailed me, what are you hoping for in returning to school this year? And so as you see, the overwhelming number of teachers who talked to me said that they were hoping for a return to pre-COVID education with a few changes. Teachers as a population and a workforce really do have opinions. There were very few teachers who actually told me I don't know. So there's only a very small sliver of people who responded and said, I don't know. The next largest group of responses came from folks who said, they're hoping for significant changes. And then there was a group of folks who said they were hoping for a return to education as it was. And then the smallest group of respondents said that they were hoping for a completely different educational experience. So what does it mean to try to do that? And what was it that was the basis or the rationale for them to make those responses? So I asked, so can you tell me what went well? For the teachers I talked to, there were two basically different responses. There were teachers who could talk to me about what went well. And there were some teachers whose schools and students had an excellent educational experience. Students did really well and actually thrived with online learning. Teachers shared that many students were highly motivated because, and this is the key, they had support at home. They had more time to devote to projects, and they focused on learning new skills. Teachers also said in these particular learning environments that virtual learning helped their students with behavior issues, as well as supported students who were having some issues with confidence and self-esteem, and even being motivated with their lessons. Some of the other things that went well is, schools were forced to change their norms for collaboration. Schools were forced to change not only how they communicated with parents, but how often they communicated with parents. So this resulted in some better structural changes in the culture of operations at the school. Educators had a chance to change and take more control over their own practice and to reflect on some of the things they took for granted in face-to-face instruction and think about what they had to plan for and do differently to try to get the same kind of engagement and interaction with their students. So that's what went well. But that was not the overwhelming experience for a number of the other teachers that I talked to. For those teachers, it became clear that whatever the issues are in the achievement gap, there is still this issue about other types of gaps in our schools. The access gap became very clear. Students who didn't have reliable internet, who didn't have those soft skills that are the hallmarks and the elements required to be a successful student in school, became even more important when they were on their own and more independent and away from school. So having time management skills and the motivation to sign in and log in and sit there alone most of the time to do work or to engage with online synchronous or asynchronous instruction required a different type of support at home. It was more than, do you have homework today? And so students who didn't have that strong support at home suffered during virtual learning. And so for a lot of teachers, that created a lot of frustration just on looking at student-centered problem solving to make this work well. The other things that we found and that teachers talked about was over time, there was a lack of student engagement. While student engagement initially, they either had the experience that student engagement started off low because it took time to get notice out to parents, we're back and we're starting instruction again, or it started out high and it declined. So they had these peaks and valleys of student engagement over the course of the year that was really difficult to figure out, really difficult to overcome, because the obstacles or reasons for the lack of student engagement varied with community, varied with the grade level, varied with the technology that was available for students to use. And let's just be clear. From grade to grade, there are some subjects and topics that require more time to schedule, that required more equipment or different types of learning and lesson development for teachers to do. It required adapting schedule changes for students because students didn't necessarily sit in their seats for 6 straight hours. It increased the teacher workload. It increased the teacher's workload because, for example, I have a very good friend who taught culinary arts. She had to do, not only did she need to plan her lessons, but she had to develop the YouTube videos that needed to get posted and give her students scheduled time to go visit the YouTube videos and then schedule her classes. And then so all of that additional planning. But then there was also the issue of low teacher morale. At the beginning of all this, when schools first closed and there was this lag time while the communities waited for online instruction to begin, when online instruction began, teachers were the heroes. And schools and communities were so excited and just thrilled to see the effort that classroom teachers and schools were putting into supporting and creating engaging opportunities for their kids. But by the time the interest started to wane and people started getting really concerned about learning loss, we shifted from the excitement and the opportunities and potential of digital learning to learning loss. Teachers became the GOAT. And so their morale began to decline and slip because people weren't understanding that we didn't just, as an institution, the state of California, and in fact, this country, didn't have an emergency plan for this kind of emergency. And we did not have an understanding of what it meant to immediately flip the script on the kinds of instruction that we are doing and change the culture and climate for learning and engagement in a way that still has meaning, because somebody all along the way has assumed that digital learning just becomes an electronic substitute teacher. But the problem is that is not what digital learning actually is or does. And it was a full 10 months into the school year before the Department of Education even developed and put out to the field a digital learning guide. And it was those conversations, not only with the Department of Education, but with staff at the County Office of Education in Sacramento, with Nancy Hirota and so many other folks, when they began looking at and understanding what it means to do this. That was one of the reasons why I suggested there's a good conversation here that can be had between your schools and your program and what the state was trying to do to advise and give good modeling to the rest of the state. So that's part of the reason why that conversation happened. So we're stuck here now as we sit here reopening school. And by the way, congratulations, you opened school. They came back and you're doing what you need to do. It's November. We're getting ready to look at the holidays, and I can guarantee you there's a lot of people who are going to think of a lot of things to be thankful for, and school is going to be one of them. But let's be clear. We lost something because of our shared experience over the past 20 months. And school is never going to be what it was. And that's probably a good thing when you think about it, because while we lost some good things, we also lost some very bad things. And there's an opportunity for us to rethink how to think about schooling, how to think about accountability, but also how to think about school planning. What are the types of digital learning experiences that are worth retaining? How can we incorporate those experiences and activities into our programs? This is the work you all are already doing. So just because you've come back to face-to-face instruction, digital learning is not going to be your plan B. It's still an integral part of the work of your programs. But how do you look for and understand and how to make improvements on those models and practices? What are the kinds of deep thinking you need to have? So I'm going to give you some suggestions, but I'm only going to focus in two areas: English language arts and mathematics. And that's because, as it turns out, as we sit here right now in November, school districts are getting ready for two very important school planning activities beginning in December. First of all, you may recall there was a statewide assessment that was done last school year, and districts had multiple options for how to do statewide assessment, how to do an assessment in English language arts and mathematics. Those scores, if you took the state assessments, are going to have been made available to districts for their private reviewing, and they'll start having those public discussions, and that information will start being available on not only the Department of Education website, but on your school district websites, what those test scores and outcomes for the students actually were. So when you start looking at those test scores and those outcomes, districts are going to be required to start revising their LCAPs. And there have been, the State Board of Education adopted 7 specific changes to the LCAP template to help address not only addressing learning loss and digital and how to continue with good models and practice for face-to-face, but also digital learning in areas where that becomes important, but also what are the conversations about accountability that are going to be important at this point. So I'm going to ask you to think about what it is, what the evidence tells you about what's going on with your students. You've already heard information about your assessments, and you're doing some work right now to do some revising on your plans. So let's start thinking first with English language arts. And there are 3 critical questions I'm going to ask you to think about. How well do your students communicate in writing? How well do your students understand spoken information? How well can students find and present information about a topic? Now, these should be 3 questions that anybody can ask, and these would be 3 questions people should be asking when we start talking about what students know and are able to do. And I would love to take credit for them because they're actually brilliant questions. But these are actually the questions that are already being reported to you when you get your student score reports for your schools. These are the assessment claims for English language arts from the Smarter Balanced Assessment. And it tells you, based on the performance of the students, which students are meeting or exceeding or not meeting the standards in response to these three questions. You can actually see the claims report from your Smarter Balanced Assessment on these three questions. But now that's just the evidence. So that's evidence and data that you can use directly to help you frame and decide whether or not your program is having the instructional impact on your students, both as a school and among the student subgroups. What is the instructional impact of your program to help students develop and show evidence that they can do these things well? But having that evidence about whether they are or are not is only the first step. The next thing you should do is think about, okay, so what in our instructional program made the difference? What else does this information tell us we can do differently or that we should drop altogether? So when you start thinking about how well do students communicate in writing, the question is not whether or not you need to adopt new material. The question is, are we using the material well? Does the material seem to work better for some students than others? And what else can we do to improve that instruction, to improve student communication skills? So those are the ways that you can facilitate deeper thinking about your English language arts instruction, whether you're talking about your face-to-face instruction or your digitally supported instruction and educational activities that you'll pick for and provide for students. So as you select applications and online activities for students, the questions can be, how well will this improve students' abilities to communicate in writing? How well will this improve what students hear and learn in comprehension for spoken information? How does this improve students' ability to find and present information about a topic? So while these are both information literacy questions, as well as those soft skills that employers want to see in students, these are the questions that also deal with that matriculation as students move from early grades to up to middle grades to high school. These are the matriculation questions that you can see how students are making gains and showing improvement over time, because it's not just the evidence from the assessment, it's also what your instructional program continues to improve to do better and well. The same thing is true for mathematics. How well do students use mathematical rules and ideas? How well can students show and apply their problem-solving skills? How well can students think and logically express their thoughts in order to solve a problem? Again, this is a report you will receive if you took the Smarter Balanced Assessment in your district. You can see the claims report, and these three questions are in the claims report for each of your grades, and it's available for you not just for the whole district or school site, but you can see this information by student subgroup as well. And again, that's simply the evidence. You can turn and take that evidence and evaluate your instructional program and the instructional content that you're offering to students to address these particular academic outcomes. So these are the questions that you can use to help you think through and go through specific ways to look at your action plans and to think about how to prioritize and make a link between the evidence you have about your student achievement and the specific priorities you want to apply in your action plans based on that evidence.